Welcome back. It's time for Viewpoint now. In line with efforts to embrace a new normal, border restrictions have been eased to allow for leisure travel and tourism. For more on the prospects ahead, I have Professor Bae So-young from Kyung Hee University. Professor Bae, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you for having me again.
I also have Mr. Paul PRU-ANG-KARN at the Pacific Asia Travel Association. Paul, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you very much for having me on here today.
Right, Professor Bae, we'll start with you then. The impact of COVID-19 on the tourism industry has been extensive, to say the least. Could we start with a few words on the sad reality?
Sure. Yes, regarding the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism industry, experts often mention that tourism sector was the very first hit and the hardest hit and would be the last to recover. So as you were aware of, tourism sector is a really big business. So before the COVID-19 situation, it used to account for about 10% of the global GDP level, and it created for more than 300 million jobs. But over the last 2.5 years, over 100 million jobs have been at risk. And also the tourism corporates were out of business, and also especially the female workers representing for more than half of the entire tourism workforce also have been impacted severely. And also the shock in the tourism-dependent countries were far worse. And this is actually the third year from the outbreak of the pandemic, and the current situations vary by countries. So per accelerated vaccinations, some countries, they tried to remove some of the social distancing regulations. But on the other hand, the other countries, they still impose strict travel restrictions. So according to the World Tourism Organization, the volume of international tourist arrivals would grow up to 30 to 78% in 2022 compared to the previous year, but it would still be more than 50% below than the pre-pandemic level. So it would probably take at least 2 or more years to fully recover from those pandemic risks.
Right, I see. And Paul, staying with that, what more can you share with us about changes in travel trends in the Asia-Pacific region in the wake of this pandemic?
Well, you know, with some places already opening up, we've seen sort of this pent-up demand, especially for those looking to visit friends and family, friends and relatives. And people are actually looking for more local experiences. And they're looking to stay longer in destination, which is a great aspect because, you know, with longer stays, you're talking about longer spends, better yield from the individual travelers, and that's great for the industry with such low visitor numbers happening around the region.
Right, it is. And focusing here in South Korea then, Professor Bae, Korea is now seeking to embrace a new normal. And that being said, what can you tell us about the status quo with regard to the local tourism sector?
Well, in Korea, since the government removed the social distancing regulations last month, it seems like people started to recover their daily life. So the total number of domestic tourists has increased at a great deal, and the rooms at popular tourism destinations were all booked, so very, very crowded. And also the group tours, such as field trips or workshops, have been also initiated. And in fact, the traveling the natural areas, like nature-based tourism, is actually one of the popular activities still. But recently, regardless of the size of the crowd, people just started to travel a lot more frequently compared to the past during the pandemic seasons. And tourism service providers still highlights their criteria and thorough effort to ensure safety and hygiene. But at the same time, they try to offer a variety of tourism experiences to meet the increased needs of traveling. And as you were aware of, many people got so much depressed during the pandemic seasons, so people like to do something good to themselves. So the trend of wellcation, combined words of like wellness, well-being plus tourism, so it's been really dominant. So local tourism government tried to offer many tourism goods to satisfy such needs. And one good news is that local tourism business, they started to offer lots of job opening, which is very encouraging because many people wanted to look for the job. And then government also have made full effort to support the recovery of tourism sector based on the large-scale financial aid, plus lots of marketing plans to revitalize the industry in the local areas.
Right, that is good to know then. Paul, what are your prospects with regard to the tourism industry here in Asia for this particular year?
For this particular year, well, 2022 is a turning point for the industry, right? I mean, we've seen destinations are opening up, some slowly, some have fully opened up. You know, as Professor Bae had mentioned, you know, our numbers sort of in line with what UNWTO is predicting for this year. So anywhere between 25% to 50% of 2019 numbers. So that's pre-pandemic numbers. That's, you know, but of course it will probably take till 2024 when we'll see numbers close to or exceeding 2019 numbers. However, there's still a lot of variables that need to be considered as we look at recovery over in the region. First, it will be uneven. And then, of course, we have any new strains of variants that might show up. Of course, rising jet fuel prices, and of course, the rising cost of inflation. And last but surely not least is any geopolitical conflicts that might arise or that are currently happening, which already will put pressure on a nervous traveling public, you know, just coming out of a pandemic. But, you know, hopefully this is a turning point and we'll see the start of growth and by 2024 we'll see the numbers sort of, you know, the same or exceeding our pre-pandemic numbers.
Right, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for that, of course, then. Professor Bae, I understand there are also quite a number of favorable factors that look to further boost the regional tourism industry. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, the government will actually allow foreign travelers to come to visit Jeju and Yangyang area without a visa. So from next month, the visa-free program for Jeju Island, they will allow foreigners from most of the countries to get to Jeju Island and stay legally for at least 30 days without a visa. And in terms of the Yangyang area, so the group tours that has 5 or more tourists from the 3 particular Asian countries, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia, via Yangyang International Airport. They will be allowed to travel around the Gangwon province as well as the Seoul metropolitan areas for about 15 days with no visa. But they have to come and reserve a tourism product through the designated travel agency designated by the Gangwon province. And another good news is that President Yoon recently announced his intention to resume the flight between the Gimpo International Airport and Haneda Airport at Tokyo. So it's been suspended for a long time due to the COVID pandemic situations. So I believe this resumption of the flight between Korea and Japan will actually benefit the recovery of many local tourism that mainly targets Japanese market. And other than that, the recent announcement that the United States, they tried to lower advisory for overseas travel. So for South Korea, the US has lowered the travel advisory from level 4 being the highest to level 1 being the lowest. And this is actually also encouraging.
Right. And Paul, how does the lifting of COVID-19 related border protocols look to affect the tourism industry, as is the case in countries like Vietnam and Thailand?
Oh, well, it's a positive benefit. You know, lifting of borders will attract more visitors to your destinations, Thailand or Vietnam. You know, the idea of seamless travel is extremely important for any traveler. You know, especially when you're dealing with a family, you're doing group travel with your family. You know, you want to make it as seamless as possible, as easy as possible. So the lifting of any protocols that might be in place will add added pressure to your trip. So Thailand, you know, I think there is talk in Thailand they're going to finally remove the Thailand pass. Well, you have to register online. Instead, they'll have another mechanism where when you submit your visa, just submit your vaccination card. You know, no more PCR tests on arrival, no more test and go schemes. These will all boost travel confidence and, you know, make sure that a seamless experience for the visitor will be extremely important to the recovery of the region.
Right. And which is why, Professor Bae, here as well, industry insiders have called for simpler COVID-19 entry requirements to allow for a greater number of visitors into South Korea as well. And it appears that the authorities here have responded to those calls, right?
Yes. So as the number of new daily infections has decreased, the government actually will allow inbound tourists to enter into the country with a negative rapid antigen test instead of the formal PCR test as of May 23rd. So tourists actually used to also undergo the PCR test on their very first day of arrival, and then they had to go over the rapid antigen test on their 6th or 7th day of arrival before. But as of May 23rd, what they have to do is to go through only PCR test within the 3 days after arrivals. That's also the good way and simpler way. And also the children under the age of 12, not the age of 6. And they, if as far as they travel with the vaccinated parents, they are actually free from the self-isolation as well. And also the vaccinated individuals aged 12 to 17, they also are approved to stay here if the 14 days have passed after their 2 inoculations.
Right. And Paul, what do you propose then to ensure sustainable growth within the tourism industry as we hope to perhaps move beyond this pandemic era?
Well, I think governments need to sort of re-look at their KPIs. Instead of focusing on visitor arrivals, they need to look at the quality of the tourist arrivals. Those who are staying longer, spending longer, and ensuring that economic benefit really gets to everyone in the entire travel tourism chain, and even all the way down to the local communities, the local craftspeople, and how do you and really understand managing tourist flows and stop worrying about the visitor arrival numbers, right? I think that's too many times in the past it's always been how many people are coming to your country. That shouldn't be the KPI for any destination. It should be about the quality of tourists, the spends, and if that spend is actually benefiting the proper people within the industry.
Right. And Paul, staying with you then, what is your association, the Pacific Asia Travel Association, seeking to do perhaps this year to ensure such quality travel within this particular region?
Well, what we're doing is working with a lot of our government members to inform them about different aspects they should really focus on, especially, like I said, understanding less on the marketing, on destination marketing, more on destination management, community-based tourism, creative tourism. I think Professor Bae had mentioned wellness tourism, adventure tourism, and these are all related with environmental protection and well-being of not just the individual, but also of the planet and the local communities. So that's that's a message that we've been pushing out either through our conferences or through our discussions with our government members or in roundtable discussions with our various members and sectors that are part of PATA.
Right. And staying with that, Professor Bae, what else do you propose to further encourage foreign visitors into South Korea?
Well, before the pandemic, for example, the revisit rate of inbound tourists who come to Seoul was about 50%. And the major reason for their visit was majority of them just travel here for leisure, plus like shopping and food. But as you were aware of, like shopping, it's very easily replaceable. So the other destinations can also offer the same benefit. So in my opinion, for South Korea, I strongly believe the K-content and Hallyu can be the key driver and the next economic engine for the inbound tourism market. So the consumption of Hallyu content has increased at a great deal over the last decades. And in one of my recent research, I tried to examine the influence of Hallyu content on their actual visit intention and the actual visit. And then according to the in-depth interviews with many international students who lived in Korea, I just learned that once people watch a particular content, they get so much familiar with the culture described in it, and they get really fascinated about those culture, and they have a strong desire to learn more about the specific culture elements described in the contents, and ultimately they make decision to make actual travel to their particular country and even study and live there. So I believe that it is very important to define what is really Hallyu and Hallyu tourism, and then try to boost up some marketing strategy of how to utilize those K-contents from the long-term perspectives. They will definitely try to encourage people's visit to Korea and enhance the image of Korea, and also encourage potential tourist visit to many different local areas as well, and ultimately create some economic contributions as well.
Right. And Paul, as a pundit within this particular industry of tourism, what are your thoughts on ways that Korea could make to further boost tourism into this country?
Well, I think focusing on local culture, right? I mean, as Professor Bae had mentioned, and that's people really want that local experience, and Korea offers that, everything from the culture, the heritage, the music, K-pop music, or even the food, right? I mean, focusing on these local elements is going to be really the best way to ensure a more sustainable future make sure that the economic benefits reaches everyone within the communities. So I think that's a real benefit that Korea has, and they're presenting it. They're presenting it in your dramas, your TV shows, your music, and continue doing that and really focusing on that and making it the highlight of visiting Korea.
Right. Professor Bae, tourism trends marked a tangible change during this particular pandemic, of course. Do you see these trends as staying with us, or do you see them disappearing once we move beyond this pandemic?
Well, we have watched lots of different changes during this pandemic situations, and I think one thing that is really notable is that we need travel. Plus, we have to protect this travel and tourism industry in a very sustainable manner. So we have faced lots of technological development, and we also got to experience lots of tourism, smart tourism experience as well. And of course, I think this kind of trend will remain for a while because literally it has become like a new normal. It's become part of our life, so it will remain for a while. And also it will take very long time for this industry to fully recover like before the pandemic. But I think what's really important is to look ahead and prepare for the future, because the recovery of the tourism industry is positive, but as the recovery will be accelerated, the negative effect as well as positive effect will be also followed. So I think we really need to fully consider the sustainability in the recovery process in the industry.
Right, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for that then. Professor Bae, thank you very much for your insights. And Paul PRU-ANG-KARN over in Bangkok, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.